see who the candidates will be in November and which initiatives passed.
Bringing you live up-to-the-minute election returns, plus the voices of California, political experts Steve Swat and Kevin Riggs, and unique perspectives. Tonight, the issues, the decisions, and the results as Channel 3 reports Decision 98. Now, Dave Walker and Lois Hart.
And welcome back to Channel 3 Reports Decision 98 election coverage.
We welcome our viewers in Northern California and those watching on CSpan and Primestar. We are starting to get some results at this hour from the hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots cast during this primary. Channel 3's Tom Duhane is live at the Sacramento County Registrar of Voters. Tom?
Lois, as we reported to you earlier this evening, Sacramento County ran its absentee ballots earlier than usual. They ran the bulk of them, some 45,000, at about 5 o'clock tonight, and that will allow them to give us very shortly the first results from the absentees about 8:01. In the meantime, first, let me show you where all those absentee results have come from.
Sacramento County tonight counting 50,000 absentee ballots. That's double the number of mail-in ballots in past primaries, but not a record. The increasing use of absentees does not, however, signal increasing interest in elections. Today's county turnout is estimated at 38%.
That would be slightly better by about 0.9% from 4 years ago. Would be very low in terms of historical turnout in primary elections. It's continuously declining. 37.1 in 4 years ago. If we fell below that, we would have a record low.
200 county workers are here tonight. They've been answering voter questions on the phone and processing the absentees. But soon, they'll be handling boxes of ballots arriving by car from 841 separate polling places around the county.
And I've just got the first results here. I can tell you what Sacramento County was thinking about in terms of the governor's race and the absentees. Dan Lundgren appears to be the leading candidate from the first 50,000 votes with about 41% of the vote, followed by Gray Davis with 35%, Al Checky coming in with 10%, then Jane Harmon with 8%. In the race to replace Dan Lundgren as Attorney General, Dave Sterling, who served in his office for many years, at 38%, Bill Lockyer with 28%, followed by Mike Capizzi from Southern California at 12%. If you bear with me just a moment, I'll try to get you our first look at the Sacramento County Sheriff's race as we're going through about 5 pages here. This is what happens when you get the results hot off the presses. I haven't even a chance to look at them yet. Here it is. 63% of the votes of the absentee vote going to Lou Blanis, and Police Chief Byrd from the Delta area coming in second with 17%. The hottest ones off the presses, and of course there's a lot more coming tonight. As soon as the ballots start arriving about 8:15 to 8:30, more results coming your way.
Don't seem to be any surprises so far. When do they think they might close up shop there tonight? How long is this going to take there?
Well, remember, they have to wrap everything up. That means disputed ballots, ballots that may be lost. The folks will be working here till about 2 or 3 in the morning.
Okay, Tom, thanks.
And if you haven't voted this hour, you are officially out of luck now. You can't vote anymore. California's polling places closing just a few minutes ago. Channel 3's Mike Lurie is live at a voter station in Sacramento tonight with a look at the turnout today. Mike?
Well, Dave, at this polling station in Southland Park, an estimated 45% of the registered voters did actually go to the polls. Now, that's a little bit better than the statewide average, but it still means that more than half of all the registered voters chose not to participate.
If you voted today, you were the exception to the rule, because most Californians elected to do something else, fishing or boating instead of voting. But whatever the reason, the turnout was running at less than 50%. Some people wanted to vote but could not.
Well, I moved recently and I turned in my voter registration because I moved. I never got any paperwork back, so I can't vote. And I'm really upset because I voted ever since I was 18.
But for those who did, it was an affirmation of everything they fought for, like Vietnam veteran Tom Burris.
I fought for those sorts of things so that people have those sorts of rights. I'd be really silly, I think, if I didn't take advantage of those rights that I had to fight for.
Some people even braved injuries to come to the polls.
Because I like to have some say in the decisions about what happens in my life and who makes the laws and what the laws are.
And today's election was a true civics lesson for first-time voter David Olson.
And I guess I got to get used to it as a young age, and then I guess as I get older, I'll probably learn more and be able to vote probably better. If I don't vote, for the right stuff now, I'm sure I'll know more in the future for starting out as a young age.
Well, David did in fact get off to a good start today by voting, something that most Californians avoided. But as many voters told us today, if you didn't vote, then you lose the right to complain about the results down the road. I'm Mike Lurie reporting live from Southland Park. Back to you now, Dave, in the studio.
Yeah, with the declining numbers of people voting here in California, Mike, it seems like these decisions, the rest of the California future, are being made by a minority of voters, a minority of people who seem to be older and whiter these days. Is that what you're finding out as well?
Well, that's something that's been reported widely, and in fact what it means, of course, is that if you do vote, that your vote actually matters more, has more weight, because you're taking the place of people who didn't come to the polls. So it's allowing you to have a greater say in the matter than those who chose to stay home.
Okay, Mike Lurie at one of the polling stations today, and those who did go to the polls today found they had a lot of candidates to choose from, a lot of issues. 1998 is the first time in 90 years that California has held an open primary. But taking partisan mischief and voter confusion into account, is the open primary really a good idea?
I think it might be a good thing, but I really haven't thought a lot about what kind of repercussions it'll have.
That, in a nutshell, captures the mood as the candidates head into California's open primary, which means confusion for voters and absolute uncertainty for politicians.
We're in uncharted waters right now.
The Assembly Speaker is blunt when asked about the impact of the open primary.
We really don't know. I mean, we know that other states have, had an open primary system, and but California is a unique state in many, many ways.
The honest answer is no one knows, because none of us have been through this experience before in California, and so it's completely unpredictable.
The open primary, approved by voters 2 years ago, allows candidates of all parties to appear on the June 2nd ballot. That means a longer ballot. Candidates warn it could also mean cross-party mischief.
My concern is I've got too many Republicans out there who tell me they're going to vote for what they consider to be the weakest Democrat to help me. And I've had people tell me that over the last month, an amazing number of you.
Voter Pete Mikasich says that sounds like a good idea.
But I have no problem with it, because I like the idea of being able to vote for somebody to eliminate somebody else.
But his daughter believes that voting pattern will be uncommon.
I mean, hopefully if somebody is sophisticated enough to think through it to that degree, they would also think, but gosh, what happens if that person wins? So I would hope not.
At the end of the day, Democrats are going to tend to vote for Democrats. Republicans are going to tend to vote for Republicans, because that historically is what they've done.
But no one really knows until the ballots are counted, making June 2nd a grand experiment in the largest political lab in the country.
And there is even some controversy over whether tonight is really California's first ever open primary. We checked with the Secretary of State's office, which says yes. This is the first. Earlier in the century, candidates were allowed to cross, file, or to run in more than one party. But this is the first time that voters have been able to vote for whomever they wanted, regardless of party affiliation.
Dan Lundgren is the closest thing in this primary to a sure thing. While not uncontested, California's Attorney General is a strong favorite to win the Republican nomination for governor. Channel 3's Roy Stearns is live at Lundgren's headquarters in Newport Beach. Roy?
Well, we had a conversation a little while ago with the Attorney General running for governor, but before we get into that, let me kind of show you the tenure and the mood around the room here. The party faithful are starting to show up here in large numbers. There's a few candidates here. People are starting to get ready for some of the evening's speeches, festivities, the Republican Party faithful. But in the meantime, let me go back and tell you some of the things Dan Lundgren said to us a little while ago. He, of course, is in a race of 17 candidates that are on the ballot in that open primary, 5 of whom are Republicans. But I would bet that most people in California can't name the other 4 Republicans that are running in this race against Dan Lundgren. Lundgren is absolutely the probable nominee tonight, no surprise in that. But he will go on to win tonight in an election where the turnout may be one of the worst ever. We've been watching some of the returns down here and some of the predictions from some of the television stations, and they're saying it could be as low as 22%, which is pretty awful. And so our question to Attorney General Lundgren, running for governor, is what are his concerns about that? Is that disturbing?
I am one who's been involved in politics all my life, involved in government, concerned about government. I grew up thinking that the President of the United States was a pretty important person, and that all of us, little kids, grew up thinking that we could be President of the United States. There seems to have been a reaction against that.
Well, after this election tonight, after this primary election is over here in June, I would guess that the low voter turnout will be the #1 story that hits the airwaves tomorrow. And there are lots of possible causes that will be explained and blamed, all the way from the open primary to negative campaigning to millionaires running again for office to no major divisions on any of the issues or any of the candidates, many of the candidates, no ultra hot initiatives, and the list goes on and on from there, and we'll be debating that for a long time. And the question will be, what, if anything, can be done about such a low turnout in California? Reporting live from the Republican headquarters, I'm Roy Stearns. Back to you in Sacramento.
We're going to see Dan Lundgren, I suppose, later, Roy, as well as other Republicans, including the governor. Is that right?
We will. Pete Wilson is going to come down in about half an hour to an hour, I'm told. Matt Fong will not be down till about 10 o'clock. He wants to wait until there is some call on this race, but I think 10 o'clock might be too early for that particular race to be called. We could be standing here at 11 o'clock or midnight waiting for that to happen.
There's always one that keeps us up late, you know?
Yep.
All right, thanks, Roy. And we go now live to Kevin Riggs, who's with a man who could go head-to-head with Lundgren come November, and that's Gray Davis.
That's right, Lois. There is growing optimism here that Gray Davis is going to be claiming a fairly strong victory tonight. We are at his room here at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. We are told that Gray Davis has been here at the hotel since about 5:30. We also are told by his campaign manager that he expects to come down here and address this crowd about 10 o'clock tonight, and that he may not wait for a concession from either of the two major Democrats in this race. Gray Davis has been in public life for 23 years. Here is more on his background.
I've been preparing for the job of governor most of my adult life, and I make no apologies for that.
It is the ultimate truth about Gray Davis, whose relentless ambition has been on display for the past 23 years. Ambition that led to his official campaign kickoff in March. He first appeared in public life as chief of staff to then Governor Jerry Brown, followed by stints in the Assembly as state controller and as lieutenant governor. Despite that experience, Davis faced tremendous early skepticism, especially against two wealthy and more colorful opponents.
But I know two things. First, your vote is not for sale. And second, I offer the voters a wealth of experience that money simply can't buy.
That, in fact, became Davis's campaign theme, and in May, he climbed from third to first in the polls. But Davis also faced accusations from Al Checkey that he'd been billing taxpayers for campaign travel, a charge he denied.
I dutifully report every trip, every contribution, and keep my records in order.
Davis has stressed his education reform plans while cultivating support from labor and veterans groups. And he stayed on message during an LA debate and on the campaign trail about why voters would choose an insider.
I think the mood of America has changed. California is enjoying a recovery. They attribute some of the economic recovery to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is the ultimate pol. He's been in politics his whole life. I have too. So they see me as the best of the choices to continue the economic recovery, to fix the schools, and to bring us together as a people.
Davis, his background, he has been saying all along, in fact, you see the campaign slogan here behind me, experience money can't buy. He's been using that slogan to try and offset the megabucks campaign that has been conducted against him by Al Checkey and to a lesser degree by Jane Harman. In fact, Gray Davis has been saying in recent days that voters are rejecting the negative ads about Checkey and rejecting his call for massive change. Kind of interesting. Davis telling me earlier this week that people give President Clinton some credit for the economic recovery here in California, that Bill Clinton is a lifetime politician, and that he expects that some of that benefit will spill over into his race here tonight as well. Again, Gray Davis is here in the hotel at the Biltmore, and we expect to see him down here to address this crowd a little bit later tonight. Dave and Lois, back to you.
You know, Kevin, some of the savviest political analysts were saying early on in this campaign, they were counting Gray Davis out, and I suppose he's hoping that this campaign, this primary campaign, has lessons for November as well.
Well, the message here, if in fact Gray Davis wins, and this is what his people have been saying all along, this is a message that will be watched by politicians nationwide, is that people who've been in public office for years, who have lots of experience, but who don't necessarily have a lot of money, are still the ones that people support. We have seen over the years in California wealthy candidates running for governor and U.S. Senate, and it never seems to work. We saw Michael Huffington running for Senate in 1994. Voters rejected him. We have seen, again, other wealthy candidates in past years. People might flirt a little bit with those candidates early on, but in the end, they always seem to reject them.
Yeah, and particularly, Kevin, in times when the economy is good, and right now, California's economy, it seems, just can't get any better, so I'd imagine that a lot of voters are saying, why change horses in midstream? And if you're going to make a new choice, you might as well with somebody you know.
Well, Gray Davis actually was asked that question today after he cast his vote, and he admitted, he says, I've been extremely lucky. He says, I feel we've run a good campaign, but we've been very lucky. The economy is doing well. People are comfortable, and he says people don't want change. And he says it might be different for him if people were upset and were angry at government.
Yeah, that's when those businessmen outsiders, I guess, have some appeal. All right. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Meanwhile, Senator Barbara Boxer is looking to extend her run on Capitol Hill. The only question tonight, who will be her opponent come November? Tim Herrera is tracking that campaign. Tim?
Dave, a dozen people want the available U.S. Senate seat in California. Anyone from a pharmacist to a school principal to the incumbent are on the ballot today, but three names seem to rise above the crowd. Those names are Boxer, Fong, and Issa.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, very good.
Senator Barbara Boxer should have a relatively stress-free night. In this election, a little-known Democrat is her only party opponent. Despite the fact that she faces little opposition in this open primary, Boxer admits she's not sure what to expect.
People who are involved in partisan politics are saying they're telling their people to cross over and vote for weaker candidates. I hope that doesn't happen. I just hope everyone will go to the polls and vote for their favorite candidate.
14. There you go.
Resume to help him capture the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate.
We're going to defeat the 15th millionaire trying to run for high office in California.
Fong's talking about Darrell Issa. He's a self-made millionaire who's raised at least $12 million in campaign funds. Voters never heard of Darrell Issa until a year ago.
I'd never make an actor.
Neither will I. But a multi-million-dollar, nearly year-long commercial campaign has helped give Issa necessary name recognition throughout this state.
Issa and Fong have several things in common besides the fact that both are Republicans. Both are 44 years old. Conservative, you could say, and they like to talk about curbing government spending and curbing government waste. But Issa has raised 4 times the money that Fong has raised for this election, although, as we know, the amount of money doesn't always transfer into a lot of votes. In the meantime, Dave and Lois, while all this is going on, Barbara Boxer sits back and watches the fight. Back to you.
And Tim, the latest polling shows who's in the lead, if anybody.
That's hard to say, Dave. Well, obviously, Barbara Boxer has no problem there, but it's really neck and neck between Fong and Issa. The polls have been very close in that regard, so this is a real dogfight for them tonight.
All right, Tim Herrera watching that campaign for us, and Steve Swat, our political expert, is also watching the vote here in California today, and sort of an emerging vote, Steve, is the Hispanic vote here in California.
That's right, Dave. You know, a lot has been said so far this evening about the new rules in California, the open or the blanket primary, and because of that, candidates are reaching out to various constituencies like never before. For example, lip service to the Latino vote, but not anymore. This election, Latinos have been courted like never before. The most obvious manifestation of this was the recent unprecedented debate before the Spanish-language media, but there's been much more. Al Checky began running Spanish-language TV ads last November. He spent 15% of his TV ad budget on Spanish-language stations. Republican Dan Lundgren, who must repair badly damaged relations between his party and the Latino community, thanks in large part to Proposition 187, is running biographical ads on Spanish-language TV. Now, the reason, of course, is Latino voters are a growing force, more than doubled since 1990, and still remains a large untapped segment for future elections, since 27% of all adults in California are Latino. By 2025, Latinos are expected to be about half of California's population. And that's why Checky sent absentee ballot mailers to everyone with a Latino surname. He has the highest name recognition and support among Latino voters, according to pre-election surveys. The first editorial boards visited by both Checky and Jane Harmon were La Opinion. Now, although 63% of Latinos get their news from TV, Davis, with a much smaller budget than his rivals, directed his TV commercials toward English language mainstream television. And that actually was a good strategic move, because surveys indicate that 18%, only 18% of Latino voters get their political information from Spanish language TV. Back to you.
Now, I gather, too, Steve, the other problem is that although the politicians are more aware of the Latino vote here in California, they don't have a very good record so far as voting in California.
That's absolutely correct. Traditionally, Latinos, which are making up a much larger force in the California electorate, and even of registered voters, do not turn out in near the numbers they should, at least comparatively.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, California's love affair with political propositions is in the spotlight this primary, and we're going to be checking out some of those hot props.
And a race between insiders in Sacramento County Sheriff's Department emerging. A handful of officers looking to succeed Sheriff Glenn Craig.
And another intriguing sheriff's race that could see this candidate make California history.
Must-see TV Thursday. Okay, you watch Brett.
And while KCRA TV takes this commercial break, we'll use the opportunity to tell you what's ahead here on CSpan. Following the primary coverage from California, Utah Senator Robert Bennett and some computer specialists and economists will talk about the year 2000 computer problem. Just before 6 a.m., we'll show you remarks from Matt Drudge. He's the publisher of the website The Drudge Report at the National Press Club. He spoke there today. Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter from California and Howard Mortman, the executive director of The Hotline, that's an online news service about politics, will join us to talk about today's primary results on tomorrow morning's Washington Journal. That begins at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. By the way, also joining us on the program is Democratic Congressman David Skaggs. He's a member of the House Select Intelligence Committee, and he'll talk about that committee's closed hearing tomorrow on nuclear testing in South Asia. At 10 a.m. Eastern, we'll show you live coverage of a Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee hearing on that same issue. The witnesses include Carl Inderfurth, the Assistant Secretary of State for South Asian Affairs, and the International Planning Service's President William Schneider. That's here on C-SPAN. Then at 2 p.m., we'll show you live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the U.S. House. Members this week are debating a proposed constitutional amendment on school prayer, also the budget resolution for fiscal year 1999, which starts October 1st, and some more on campaign finance. Again, live gavel-to-gavel House coverage here on C-SPAN starting at 2 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. And in just a few moments, we'll take you back to KCRA TV's primary election coverage as they resume from California.
And welcome back to Decision 98. We have some of the first absentee ballots counted in Sacramento County, and it shows that Dan Lundgren is leading Gray Davis in the run for governor here in California. And we have a handful of other votes now coming in from around the state as well.
And Steve Swat has that. Steve?
Well, we do have some early exit polls that indicate Dan Lundgren, to no one's surprise, will in fact be the Republican nominee. And some early absentee ballot votes have been coming in, indicating that Gray Davis, with those absentee ballots, is about 2-to-1 ahead of Al Checky, which is pretty interesting given the fact that Checky spent inordinate amounts of money to try to get the absentee ballots to go his way. But so far that we do have Dan Lundgren headed for November against, looks like, Lieutenant Governor Gray Davis.
All right, Steve, and we should mention Steve will be following some of the exit polling being conducted tonight by the LA Times and CNN. And as soon as that emerges, we'll have the latest update for you. Meanwhile, we're going to check in with an old friend of ours who is Doug Kriegel. He is live in Oakland tonight. He is following the race of Jerry Brown, the former California governor, who is now running for the mayor of the city of Oakland. Doug? Looks like Doug has a little difficulty hearing.
Big doings in Oakland tonight. Jerry Brown is throwing a block party to celebrate his victory as mayor of Oakland. The turnout figures have not been released, but people here are saying that Brown has created so much excitement that voter turnout is expected to be among the largest in Oakland history. Of course, Jerry Brown has been a heavy favorite all along, but the key question is, will he get 50% plus one in order to avoid a runoff in November? 10 other candidates are running, none expected to get more than 10% of the vote. Surveys have shown Brown getting as much as 40%, but lots of people have been undecided. And of course, the only survey that really counts is the vote itself. Now, Brown is talking about bringing a new spirit to Oakland. That's a term he used in the first time he ran for president way back in the 70s. And of course, residents of Oakland are hoping that Jerry Brown will bring the kind of national attention, focus, and yes, even celebrity to this city that that other fella, Brown, Willie, is currently bringing to the rival city across the bay, San Francisco. So we could see quite a Brown face-off across the bay in politics here. Reporting live from Jerry Brown headquarters in Oakland, Doug Kriegel, back to you in Sacramento.
All right, Doug.
Always an interesting guy to watch.
Sort of a brownout.
Yeah, we're going back to Kelly Brothers, who's talking with our Voices of California this evening. And Kelly, they've got quite the minds of their own. So you tell us this time, what are you talking about in there?
We are talking this time about multimillionaire candidates, Lois. We wanted to do it last time, but the Voices said we need to talk more about 227. This time, though, we're talking about the candidates who come in and they spend millions of dollars not just to try to get your vote, but to start off by teaching you their name. And, of course, it began a few years ago with Michael Huffington, then moved on to Ron Unz, and this year we've seen three multimillionaires enter politics in California. Darrell Issa, running for the Republican Senate candidacy. Also Jane Harmon, running for the Democratic gubernatorial bid, and also she is running against Al Checky, who it is believed has written a check for about $40 million of his own money. His own money, as I said, to teach people his name and then to try to get their vote. And so people here have a pretty strong opinion about this because obviously this is a fairly new phenomenon in California politics. Dennis, we'll begin with you. What do you think?
Well, you know, the deal with Al Checky and to a lesser extent Jane Harmon, I thought, what is their intent? You've got a person who can just write a check. It's pretty much carte blanche. They can hire a campaign management group. You can hire a media group. You can get your name out there. You're working a series of 30-second sound bites here and there. You're essentially repeating the same thing over and over and over, pretty much like you would a commercial, just a regular television commercial. But we don't know.
So in other words, you don't feel like you're getting the substance?
I don't know anything about basically what they stand for. I know what they say they stand for, but it's repetition. It's over and over and over.
Okay. Of course, this all came about, or it's kind of a consequence of campaign finance reform, where you had people who could go out and get a lot of money from special interests. Now you can't do that anymore, and in order to effectively wage a campaign in California, you need television, which is expensive. Jan, I know you had a point on this earlier as well. Tell us about that.
Well, part of the democratic process has always been having to go out and get money. You have to talk to people, you have to convince people that you're their candidate, and you ask them for their money to support you in your candidacy. That's been taken away from the candidates, and with Prop 208, we couldn't have Dianne Feinstein or Leon Panetta run this time because of the money situation. And look at the voter apathy and the low turnout at the polls. I think it's a direct correlation result from Prop 208.
Okay. That's for another discussion time. We're going to talk about voter apathy next time. Ron, you have a point on multimillionaire candidates, though, don't you?
Yeah, Kelly, I think that the California voters have been really, really clear on their opinion. And they've said so about 15 millionaires that run for candidates. What they've said is that these candidates are certainly legends, but legends in their own mind. And certainly not representatives of the people. It seems to me that the California voter wants someone that he or she feels familiar with, someone that represents their point of view, or at the very least their experience. And clearly, we have no millionaire candidates that reflect those points of view.
So in other words, even though the career politician takes a lot of hits, and it's just become very fashionable to really hit career politicians hard, at least you feel comfortable with someone and you know something about their track record.
Well, I think relationship with the career politician. In other words, it's he or she that's been tried and proven, and that can be tried again. There's an old saying, and most experienced politicians say it, is that I've often been tried and never denied and willing to be tried again. I think that's what the voter wants.
Okay.
Lori?
Experience. And what is happening here is that there is a lack of experience, or at least a lack of knowledge of prior experience in whatever area that these people are running, and that brings up suggestions or ideas about setting limits, a limit to fundraising, a limit to money spent on campaigns, a limit to time as far as your television ads and whatnot. And then going back to what Janet said, that's partly why people aren't out there voting. Why vote? These guys can write a check for the position, and then you bought whether you want to admit it or not, it's a bought-for position.
But the point is that with the people we've mentioned, they've spent over $100 million, and none of them have won yet. So they really haven't bought it. They've tried to buy the position, but they haven't done it.
Look at the other side of it, though. We also have millionaires involved in our political process that aren't looking for elected office. People like Ron Unz. I mean, he should be commended. Here's someone's a multimillionaire out of the Silicon Valley. He believes strongly on an issue, and he put his money up to get this issue on the ballot. So on the positive side, by having millionaires involved in our political process, it does benefit us in one way.
Okay.
But it does.
Yeah, it really depends on the process itself. I think we're really talking about the political process, and that in terms of this whole voting thing, it's a marketing thing. I mean, it really is a marketing thing in terms of who has the money, who doesn't have the money. What it really should, the bottom line should be, who has substance and where's the beef? I mean, who really has them, whether they be rich or they be poor, you know, and there's some inequities in the process itself, I think.
And of course, you know, now we're starting to see this on a local scale to some degree, because for the local congressional district, we had Barbara Albee, not a career politician, but she's been in politics a long time, taking on Doug Osee, who wrote $1 million check, unknown developer. And of course, $1 million doesn't go far in a statewide race, but in a local race, it got him a lot of airtime. We're going to continue this a little bit later on and kind of segue into voter apathy, because that's what's being discussed here as well, that perhaps these checks are making voters even more apathetic than they were before. And of course, we want to invite you to call in. The number is 1-800-513-33. Do we have that number? I think we do. 1-800-513-3333. And that'll be in our next section, probably coming up in about half an hour. Dave and Lois, back to you.
All right, Kelly, we're starting to get some first numbers, so watch your screen. You will see it on the crawl below me. The first numbers are starting to come in. Meanwhile, voters in 9 counties will be selecting sheriffs tonight. One of the most publicized races going on is in Sacramento County, where incumbent Sheriff Glenn Craig is stepping down. Channel 3's Lillian Kim is live at frontrunner Lou Blanes' headquarters. Lillian?
Lois, Lou Blanes has yet to arrive, but folks here plan to be celebrating tonight. That's because Lou Blanes is considered to be the clear frontrunner in this race. He is currently the #2 man at the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. He's endorsed by Sheriff Glenn Craig, endorsed by District Attorney Jan Scully, and he has the most money in this campaign, almost $500,000. But let's not forget about the other candidates in this race, 4 others to be exact. 3 are within the Sheriff's Department, and 1 is head of Ileton PD. With 1,900 employees, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department is the largest law enforcement agency in Northern California. 5 people are now vying to become the department's new sheriff. 4 of the candidates met at a recent forum, including Under Sheriff Lou Blanes, who's endorsed by Sheriff Glenn Craig. Blanes says if elected, he'll crack down on minor offenders by creating a misdemeanor jail.
Is if we can attack crime at the first level and establish a zero tolerance program, we will reduce violent crime, we will reduce crime all the way up to and down the California index.
Ileton Police Chief Eugene Bird, perhaps best known for issuing concealed weapons permits, wants to do the same in Sacramento County.
And I also will allow law-abiding citizens the means of protecting themselves. I will continue to issue carry concealed weapons license.
Brett Daniels is the deputy with the Sheriff's Department who wants more patrol officers throughout the county.
There are times when there are as little as 2 or 3 officers covering areas as large as Orangeville and Fair Oaks combined. And I don't think that's what the citizens are looking for in effective law enforcement coverage.
A 20-year veteran of the Sheriff's Department, Sergeant James Mitchell, says his goal is to reduce the size of patrol areas.
Reduce them to the beat concepts, which is smaller. It assists in response time. It also aids in communication, and it's a win-win for the community, the public, and the citizens.
Sergeant David Grant, another 20-year veteran, says he would put more officers on the streets by reducing the number of management positions.
And of course, lieutenants don't make arrests. Lieutenants don't watch inmates in the county jails. So even though we need those kinds of management positions, we don't need them to the extent that we have today.
Is expected to garner the most votes tonight, but the big question is, will he receive more than 50%? If not, then the top 2 vote-getters will face off in November in the general election. Reporting live from Sacramento, and Lillian Kim. Dave Lois, back to you.
All right, Lillian, thank you. And another sheriff's race could make history tonight if voters choose to oust their sheriff and welcome a new one. Yuba County voters choosing between incumbent Sheriff Gary Tyndall and DA investigator Virginia Black. And Mike Boyd has been looking at that race for us.
Lois, this is a very, very interesting race indeed. And Yuba County is poised to find out how it's going to go. You have 2 strong candidates. Gary Tyndall, who has never run against an opponent as sheriff, and Virginia Black, a career deputy at one time and now a DA investigator. People are calling this race very, very close.
This is one I don't know that she's able to do this job.
Because I'm a team player, because I'm not totally consumed with power and control.
50-year-old incumbent Sheriff Gary Tyndall is in a tough re-election battle. His opponent is 53-year-old Virginia Black, a child abuse specialist with the district attorney. Should she win, she'd be the first elected female sheriff in the history of California. Tyndall is responsible for 130 sheriff's employees, 55 of them deputies, and an annual budget of $8 million. A 27-year veteran, he's been through some stressful events, including a deputy shot to death a year ago. Tyndall led the memorial. Both Tyndall and Black were involved in the Lyndhurst High School shootings in 1992. Black, a 21-year veteran, was chief investigator at the trial of Eric Houston, who was convicted. There are definite issues in this sprawling county of 60,000. One of the most controversial, narcotics enforcement. It was a team effort with 5 specially trained county, city, and state officers. Yuba County pulled out 3 years ago.
I wanted local control of narcotic enforcement in Yuba County.
Without the funding and the resources, the state of California behind us, we're flying solo. I don't think that's getting the job done.
We've seized and shut down 86 methamphetamine laboratories, and we've confiscated over $19 million worth of drugs and narcotics.
Numbers are numbers, and you can make them do whatever you want.
Another big issue, morale within the sheriff's department.
The morale has been down last year or so, and probably still down now, and during a campaign, it's always going to be down.
Last year, there was a 22% turnover rate amongst people in the jail, the patrol deputies, and the dispatchers.
The campaign's been costly. Tyndall has spent about $50,000, Black about $30,000. It is a close race in a county where 10,000 to 12,000 people are expected to vote. And as far as we can determine, the absentee ballots are about to be counted in this county. We should have that report in the next 30 minutes or so, and we can bring it to you. But again, a very, very close race here in Yuba County for the office of sheriff. Live in Marysville, I'm Mike Boyd. Lois, Dave, back to you.
All right, Mike, we'll check in with you later on this evening. And the primary election, again, has filled the airways with lots, as you know, of political advertising, some positive, a lot negative.
And Channel 3's Walt Gray is live now at the state capitol with reaction to all those ads. Walt?
Lois, good evening. Good evening to you, Dave, as well. As a matter of fact, we are at the state capitol, and there are people who we've seen up in the windows up here at the Capitol burning the midnight oil, I guess, to use the old cliche, and there'll be people here throughout the course of the evening checking on the propositions and, of course, all the races that we're covering for you as well. And how do people get the information that they need in order to vote in this particular election, the primary and certainly the race to follow? Well, the Times Mirror Center survey in the early 90s showed up to 83% of the general public gets their primary campaign information from broadcast news and advertisements.
Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take back to Washington.
Television ads not only make a candidate, it's a more common vehicle for breaking your opponent as well. A trip to the archives for perhaps the first use of TV negativity was 38 years ago. A Jack Kennedy for President spot capturing then-President Eisenhower wondering if Vice President Nixon had been of much help to him.
And as for any major ideas from Mr. Nixon,
If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember.
Now, the Kennedy campaign used that ad little, fearing a backlash, which didn't happen. And from then on, negative campaign ads became more frequent and nasty.
Michael Huffington doesn't have a record. He's never done anything.
And people don't even know that Huffington's a Texan.
It just irritates the living snot out of me. Because not only do they, advertise on TV, then they're calling you on the phone and they're just bothering you. And please, can we count on your support? And it's like, gosh, just leave me alone. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and nobody's going to influence me.
I try to read between the lines. The more money spent, the more I raise an eyebrow.
Now Gray Davis is attacking him.
Most of the ads, I think, have a negative effect on me more than a positive.
That turns me off.
Does?
Yes.
What about it does?
It's just too nasty. I mean, people should just keep it real.
Keeping it real, kind of the theme. Anyone we talked to said they really don't like negative advertisements, but they do think that they're effective. We ran into a gentleman from Australia here at the Capitol just a few moments ago. He said it's the same thing in Australia as it is here. So we're not as unique, perhaps, as we think with negative ads. Back to you.
No, they get even nastier in some countries. I've
Apparently,
seen
Britain, yes.
American political consultants now consulting in Australia and elsewhere as well. Thank you, Walt.
Well, from school funding to union dues, Californians have a full slate of propositions to decide tonight.
Channel 3 Sarah Gardner live with us with the details. Sarah?
Dave and Lois, we're getting just very early numbers at this hour. We are showing that all propositions are passing, but we do have a few that are very close. Propositions 223, 224, and 226 are all very close at this hour. But again, those are just very early numbers, and we'll keep an eye on them for you throughout this evening. We do want to take a look at one of two propositions gaining national attention. Proposition 226 makes primary changes to California's Political Reform Act of 1974. It would establish new requirements with regard to payroll deduction for political activities.
This proposition requires that in order for a labor union to use a portion of the dues or fees it collects for a political campaign, the union must have a form from the worker each year authorizing the use of the money. Employers would also be required to obtain a signed form each year from employees before they deduct money from an employee's wages for political activities. These requirements apply to both private and government employers. Supporters of Prop 226 believe that they would finally be heard in how their wages or dues are spent.
The only thing I do not understand is why union bosses are so afraid to give members a choice. Return our money. You took it without our consent and spent it against our will.
While opponents feel if Prop 226 is passed, many voices will be unheard.
We little people have to band together to combine our resources and our voices in order to make ourselves heard and felt.
Some say the outcome of this proposition could have a national impact.
If this is passed in California, it will have a landslide effect in other states.
Proposition 226 would also affect campaign contributions by foreign nationals. Similar to existing federal law, this measure makes it illegal under state law to solicit or accept a campaign contribution from a foreign national. If passed, the state's Fair Political Practices Commission would enforce the requirements of the proposition. Dave and Lois, back to you.
All right, Sarah, thank you. Our political analyst, Steve Swat, says one initiative on the statewide ballot could be helping one of the candidates for governor. Steve?
Well, that's right, and that measure is Proposition 226, aimed at unions and their political contributions. And late word, with about 1% of the precincts reporting, Prop 226 is passing, but only with about 50.7% of the vote. And much of that early vote certainly would be somewhat conservative, and so Prop 226 could be in for some difficulty this evening as the votes are counted throughout the state of California. Organized labor, of course, has pumped $20 million into fighting the measure, and they have mobilized a huge election day get out the vote force. Here in Sacramento, for example, 700 volunteers making more than 25,000 phone calls and knocking on 6,000 doors of Prop 226 opponents. Statewide, the goal was 20,000 volunteers. Union households, of course, are a key element of Gray Davis's campaign political base, and when they turn out to vote, that can only help him. Now, after this election, we are likely to see renewed efforts to rein in the initiative process in the belief that it's been captured by the big money high-speed powers, which is the opposite, of course, of what its original intent was at the beginning of the century. The initiative began in 1912 to allow the citizens to end-run a legislature that was thought to be beholden to the Southern Pacific Railroad. Ironically, it was barely used during the activist 1960s, but became a major force with Proposition 13 in 1978. This decade, a record 50 have qualified for the ballot, including one so far for this November, and likely more will come. It usually takes $1 million to qualify an initiative in California, and that's why they tend to be sponsored by special interests. In 1996, a record $141 million were spent on 17 initiatives, almost as much as Clinton, Dole, and Perot spent during the entire presidential election campaign. Most of that money, of course, goes for broadcast advertising. And for the record, since 1912, when Hiram Johnson gave us the initiative process here in California, 956 initiatives have been circulated, 262 have qualified for the ballot, but only 85 have passed. Back to you.
It seems almost, Steve, as if it's negated the legislative act here in California. We're having government by proposition.
Well, it has in fact done that, and as a matter of fact, it has tied the hands to the legislature in many respects, because there have been so many initiatives passed and so many mandates placed on the legislature in terms of the state budget, the $65 billion state budget, that the legislators actually only have control over a very small amount of that budget. The rest of it tends to be mandated by state law.
All right, Steve Swat, and we'll check in with you later on.
Yeah, and that's one of the subjects that I saw our cartoonist, John Kloss, doing earlier on, the fact that the initiative process has become such a big factor in California life. John Kloss, again, joining us. He's a political cartoonist. We're having a little fun this election. And, John, what are you working on?
Oh, well, I'm still working on this one, and I'm closing it out soon because it's just a sketch, as if I would be submitting it to an editor. But I can now see it developing into a more of an end product. And this is what you can do with an hour with pen and ink. But that gives the editor a good idea of the message voters not turning down the right road.
Is that the cut line on this, John? Not turning down the right road?
It could be called the Lonely Road, I think.
The Lonely Road, or the road not taken. Voting,
the road not taken.
Yeah.
You don't have that cartoon handy. The one you showed me earlier, where you had the burying the head in the sand, referring to the propositions. Do you have that one out somewhere?
Oh, not quite yet.
Oh.
That's coming soon.
That's coming out?
Oh, all right.
Yes.
That's a great one.
I'm going to be working on more than
one
one tonight. So.
Well, let me ask you, John, how does this all work out? How do you come up with your ideas? How long does it take you to come up with one of these political cartoons?
I'd say, on balance, it takes about 1 to 2 hours to come up with a cartoon idea, and the idea is everything in a cartoon. It's 95%. You could draw stick figures, and if it's a bad idea, it's a bad idea. But if you're drawing stick figures, it's a good idea, then the cartoon works. So 2 hours for the idea, and maybe 2 hours to 3 hours to a good execution.
We're going to put you under some pressure tonight and have you drawing some cartoons just on the spur of the moment.
Okay, I'm ready.
Back to work, John. All right, thanks very much. We'll check in with you in just a few minutes, and I hope to see that cartoon about the propositions. Okay, well, we continue here tonight. We're going to check the San Joaquin Sheriff's race.
We're getting votes from that race, as well as results from the rest of today's primary starting to come in, starting to flow in at this hour. And we'll have the latest from your home county for you. And former Governor Jerry Brown looking to add to his political resume tonight. He is in a position to win the race for mayor of Oakland outright.
This summer, Frasier's on twice a week, Tuesday and now Sunday.
As KCRA TV takes a break, here's a look at our upcoming programming after their primary coverage. Members of Congress, computer specialists, and economists discuss the year 2000 computer problem.
For those of you who might think this is a little overblown for us to talk about the crisis, I would refer you to the Fortune magazine article that makes it clear that if Y2K were to hit this coming weekend, General Motors could not produce a single car in any one of their 157 manufacturing plants. That's fairly a serious challenge of things to be fixed in the next 18 months if a corporation of that size would shut down completely. If they don't do the remediation that's necessary in the remaining time.
By the British Army.
Later at 5:50 Eastern, we'll hear from Matt Drudge, founder of the internet site The Drudge Report.
We have a great tradition of freedom of the press in this country, unpopular press. If the First Lady is concerned about this internet cycle, what would she have done during the heyday when there was 12, 13 editions of a paper in one day? What would she have done with that news cycle? That's the foundation. That's what makes this club great, is the tradition. And I think we have a tradition of provocative press.
Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll show you live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the House. Members this week debating a proposed constitutional amendment on school prayer, the budget resolution for fiscal year 1999, and more on campaign finance. On the other side of the Capitol, the Senate has recessed until Thursday morning. Senators are taking Wednesday off so that they can attend the funeral for former Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater. We'll show you a live simulcast from Phoenix, Arizona, a TV station there. That's tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, the funeral of Senator Barry Goldwater on our companion network, CSpan 2. Now back to KCRA TV's primary election coverage from Sacramento, California.
Welcome back to Decision 98. As we indicated, the returns are starting to come in at this hour. Initial results are that Gray Davis and Dan Lungen leading the race for governor here in California. Rich Ibarra is at the San Joaquin election office in Stockton right now with first results from the sheriff's race. Rich?
Here at the San Joaquin County Elections Office, we're seeing quite a bit of the new returns, mainly the absentee ballots that have been counted. We have a number of races, among them Measure A, which would limit supervisors' races, or rather limit their terms in office to 2 terms, as well as a supervisor race. But one of the most intensely watched races is that of the sheriff's race. And right now, the incumbent Sheriff Baxter Dunn leads with about 70% of the vote. It's round 2 for former Sheriff Sergeant Jack Tutorucci and current Sheriff Baxter Dunn this election year. Tutorucci, who ran against Dunn 4 years ago, disagrees with the department's policy of staffing jails. Since 1991, San Joaquin County has been slowly replacing all deputy sheriffs in jails with correctional officers. So far, 44 out of the 58 counties in California have completed the process.
Deputy sheriffs come to us more qualified, they get more training, they get more benefits, they get more career opportunities, they become a better employee for the citizens of San Joaquin County.
Cutbacks in the early 90s caused the department to scale down the number of patrol deputies from 120 to 96. Since that time, an additional 8 have been added, but the sheriff's office is still off by 16 positions. One of the basic concerns is response times, especially during the early morning hours when as few as 3 or 4 deputies might be on duty.
Then they're designed to overlap each other and also designed to be staggered at such a point to where the times where we have the most calls for service come in is when the deputies are deployed.
In the last 7 years, many community programs have been implemented, including the STARS program, which puts 350 seniors on active duty on a daily basis.
It's been very well received. We put over 550 senior volunteers through our 40-hour academy.
So far in San Joaquin County, then Baxter Dunn with the first returns leading here in San Joaquin County. And as the night progresses, we'll let you know more about the other races, Measure A, as well as some of the main county supervisor race here in San Joaquin County. Reporting live here at the San Joaquin Elections Office, I'm Rich Iver. Back to you.
All right, Rich, thanks. And we have some numbers we want to show you.
The latest results are for the sheriff of San Joaquin County, incumbent Baxter Dunn, as you can see, handily winning at this hour with less than 1%. The absentee ballots counted. He has 71% of the vote right now.
All right, Kelly Brothers, of course, has been with our Voices of California tonight. We picked 20 people who we thought would be interesting, and they've got what on their minds this time, Kelly?
Well, to quote our crew here, Lois, who cares about voter apathy? Actually, we're going to start off with Jeffrey Liang. Jeffrey, 19 years old, right, Jeffrey? 20? And your first election today? Yes. And you voted? Yes. Ah, the idealism of youth. How'd it go?
It went all right.
What do you think about when you look up and see 29% or some of the other numbers bandied about for voter turnout?
Well, I relate voter apathy to also what we were talking about earlier and the million spent on the governor's race.
like Jan and Ted were saying, that the millions spent were pushing out qualified candidates. And people may not be voting because the person they want, the person they feel is qualified, is not there. So they don't have to care about the election.
So it scares off a lot of good candidates, you think. Jeffrey, thank you very much. You know what? We're going to go to the phones right now. And actually, our coverage tonight is on C-SPAN nationwide, and we have Daniel McDonald calling in from New York. Daniel?
Yes, hello.
Hi there.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I don't think cynicism is that much of a big a deal as the media would like us to think, as evidenced by outlets such as C-SPAN.
In other words, the fact that you're watching tonight indicates that voters are not cynical. Of course, you're not eligible to vote in California.
True. However, at one time I was a resident of the state, and I do have, and I believe that as the way California goes, so goes the nation.
Well, then what do you attribute 7 out of every 10 voters not voting when they're eligible to?
If you look throughout history, the primaries have always been lower turnout than the general population. And when you go for the general election, they've always been low turnout. It's not a new thing.
All right, Daniel. So we'll get 4 out of 10 in November, maybe. Let's go to, thank you very much for the call, by the way, Daniel. Let's go to Laura in Sacramento. Hi, Laura.
Yeah, hi. I do wish to speak about the voter apathy. I voted going to work this morning, which meant I hit the polls about 7:10. And I stuck the sticker on my uniform, went to work. I was totally shocked. I've never seen this before, but the people who have the ability to vote, I mean, they're citizens, they can vote, just stated, no, I'm not going to vote or whatever, because I said, don't forget to vote. No, I don't want to do it. And yet that there is employees there who are not citizens who were quite envious that they couldn't vote. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, something's crazy here. That the people who can vote don't want to vote, and yet the immigrants who want to vote can't vote. That's kind of a crazy thing.
It sure is, Laura, and that's often the way it is with many things in life, unfortunately. And as Jeffrey here, of course, wasn't able to vote because he hadn't turned 18, but now this is his first one. Let's take one last phone call if we can. Kurt in Orangevale. Kurt, real quickly, your point tonight.
Hi. In my case, it's not apathy. I did not vote today because I'm frustrated by voting for a successful ballot initiative only to see it thrown into the courts where some activist judge can dismantle it piece by piece. I feel that my vote is devalued these days, and I say, why bother?
Kurt Michaels, thank you very much, calling in from Orangevale, getting a few nods here. We're going to continue on with this topic next time because I know we're out of time, but these people want to speak, and in the next half hour, we're going to continue out once again with voter apathy and then move on to some other topics. Dave and Lois, back to you.
All right, Kelly, thank you. We're getting more results coming up at the top of the hour for you, getting close to calling some of the races now for you, and we'll be back live to Southern California as well with the latest on the run for governor.
And we'll be checking in with Sarah Gardner, who's keeping an eye on all the ballot initiatives for us, including the bilingual education and school funding initiative. So please stay with us.
And besides today being primary election day for 8 states across the country, today the Space Shuttle Discovery was also launched into space so it could dock at the Russian space station Mir and get American astronaut Andrew Thomas back on board. While KCRA takes this commercial break, we'll take a look at that launch. It happened about 6 hours ago.
And we have a go for auto sequence start. Discovery's onboard computers have primary control of all the vehicle's critical functions. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. We have a go for main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery as NASA embarks on the final mission to dock with Russia's space station Mir.
Here's the Discovery roll program.
Roger, roll Discovery.
Houston now controlling.
Correct. Fire you up, how are you?
Altimeter complete. Discovery now in a heads down wings level position, headed to a 213 nautical mile high orbit, inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. Discovery's engine is now throttling down to 67% of rated thrust as the orbiter passes through the area of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle in the lower part of the atmosphere. Three engines now throttling back up.
Discovery, go at throttle up. Go at throttle up.
Sacramento's KCRA TV and their live election coverage of the California primary results.
Senate race between Republicans Matt Fong and Darrell Issa.
And another live report from Stockton, where Sheriff Baxter Dunn is being challenged by the same man who made it interesting the last time around.
Live from the KCRA Election Center, this is Decision 98 with Dave Walker and Lois Hart, with Channel 3 News crews stationed around the state, bringing you live up-to-the-minute election returns, plus the voices of California, political experts Steve Swat and Kevin Riggs, and unique perspectives. Tonight, the issues, the decisions, and the results as Channel 3 reports Decision 98. Now, Dave Walker and Lois Hart.
Welcome back. Our continuing live coverage of Decision 98 continues now. The polls have been closed for about an hour now.
And already some of the key races are starting to shape up. Some numbers starting to come in. We've got some numbers we want to show you, and let's read along on the screen. As you can see, Gray Davis, with 5% of the precincts in, is ahead quite a bit with 57% of the vote so far. Checky's only got 22% and Harmon 21%. As a matter of fact, AP has already projected Gray Davis the winner in this race. And the Republican governor's race, too. I think we have some numbers.
Dan Lundgren is clearly the winner here, 95% of the vote with 2% in counted so far, with two minor candidates drawing about 3%.
Kevin Riggs is in Los Angeles now at the Davis headquarters. Kevin?
Yeah, hi, Lois. We are with Gary South, who is the campaign director for the Gray Davis campaign. Obviously, he is here in a very crowded room. The crowd has grown, and so has the optimism, as these early numbers have shown a very heavy turnout for Gray Davis tonight. Were these numbers, Gary, what you expected?
Yes, frankly, they were. Our tracking polling has shown that there's not been much movement in this race for 3 weeks. I think when we went on the air, reminded people that Gray Davis was in this race, reminded them of his experience, his qualifications to be governor, his service to the people of California, I think the race was over.
But tell me about this strategy. I mean, as you well know, in the early polls when he was number 3, there were some people who were writing him off completely. Was that discouraging at that point?
I would have to tell you between January and March was a very difficult period of time. We had a lot of supporters who wanted us to start spending our money instead of marshaling it for the last 6 weeks. Our strategy all along was to be competitive the last 6 weeks on television. We were more than competitive. Our message sold, and I think the message of the other candidates fell short. And what you see on the screen tonight is essentially the voters' verdict on this pairing of voters, of candidates.
How much of this support for Gray Davis is a rejection of Al Checky?
Well, I would rather put it in terms of a ratification of Gray Davis and his qualifications to be governor of California. I think the other candidates will have to speak to their own results here tonight, but I think in our case, it was pretty clear to us from day one that if we could be competitive on the money front, and that clearly did not mean dollar for dollar, because there was no way we could do that, if we could be competitive the last 6 weeks with the message we knew we had, and frankly the vulnerabilities we thought the other two candidates had, that we could win this. And that's basically what came to fruition here tonight.
So that wasn't a question of how much you spent, but how you spent it?
That is correct. And what you said with what you spent.
What is going to be what's the fall campaign going to be like between Gray Davis and Dan Lundgren?
It will be a very hard-fought campaign. I don't think the Republicans are going to let the governor's office go without a fight after holding it nonstop for 16 years with 2 successive governors. But I think there also is there's a wear rate, if you will, among the voters too. When you've been in charge of the governor's office for 16 straight years, I think Lundgren will have some difficulty convincing voters that there is some imperative to keep the governorship in Republican hands. And I think it'll be a very hard-fought campaign. I think the two candidates are relatively evenly matched in many categories. And I think ultimately it will come down to which of these two candidates really represents the mainstream positions on issues that Californians care about.
You see some irony here that we had all this talk about the open primary and what it would mean. We have all this wealth that's being spent in this campaign, and it looks like it's coming down to the two insider, more conventional politicians heading to the fall.
Yeah, but Gray Davis has always been a good crossover candidate. You don't win 3 statewide campaigns in California, all of them with more than 50% of the vote, carrying the Central Valley all 3 times, which Democrats rarely do. In 1990, carrying 57 out of the 58 counties. In 1994, pulling 29% of Pete Wilson's vote away from him on the second ballot line to be elected lieutenant governor. You don't do that unless you have crossover potential. And I think when you look at the numbers tonight, what you're going to see is Gray Davis has done very well among independent voters who could vote for the first time in this open primary. And I think you'll see we've done quite well among Republican voters.
All right, Gary South, campaign director for the Gray Davis campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that is the story here at the Biltmore in downtown Los Angeles. Obviously a tremendous amount of optimism, everything but an actual claim of victory tonight. Clearly they believe they had this nomination wrapped up, and the early numbers certainly reflect that. Back to you.
Kevin, as we reported, AP has already declared Gray Davis the winner.
Okay.
All right, Kevin, thank you. And some are now probably asking, what happened to Jane Harmon, a candidate, a congresswoman who was considered probably to be the leading candidate at one time in this race because it was thought, anyway, that she had the women's vote. Alicia Malaby is with the Harmon campaign headquarters in Manhattan Beach. How are they taking it down there, Alicia?
Well, Dave, so far they're not saying much. Jane Harmon arrived here at the Manhattan Beach Marriott about 45 minutes ago. She is watching election results privately with her family. The congresswoman will address supporters later on for what is expected to be a concession speech. Earlier when she arrived, she didn't have much to say to reporters.
I'll talk to you later. I feel fine. I feel just fine. Thank you.
Has been hoping that a large number of undecided voters, mainly women, can make a difference for her in this race. She has been running, though, a distant second behind Gray Davis for quite some time. Before launching her campaign for governor's office, Harmon was largely unknown outside of L.A. That was part of her problem. Her campaign manager tonight says they could have done more to educate voters about Jane Harmon statewide. He also says that the $6 million that Al Checky spent on negative advertising against Harmon was something that was very difficult for her to overcome. Regardless of the outcome tonight, Harmon is expected to attend a Democratic unity breakfast tomorrow morning in Los Angeles to throw her support behind the winner in this race, if in fact it is Gray Davis, and she will be addressing her supporters. As I mentioned, later on tonight we will bring that to you live. Dave and Lois, back to you.
All right, thanks, Alicia.
And also at the Checky headquarters in Los Angeles right now is Laura Anthony, who this has to be terribly disappointing because already, as you know, Laura, Attorney General Dan Lundgren and Gray Davis, Lieutenant Governor, have already been declared as the winners. Any sight of Al Checky so far?
Well, Dave, we understand he is inside the Biltmore, but he has not made his first appearance here in the ballroom. And as a matter of fact, there's been no mention of those results here yet. So folks are not aware, at least from the presentation going on here, that the AP has in fact declared Gray Davis the winner in this race. Even before then, the atmosphere has to be described as subdued. Al Checky earlier this year jumped out of the gate very quickly and took a lead in the governor's race, but since then he has lost considerable momentum.
Got to reclaim these streets. It's pretty hard to say you've got an equal opportunity.
Despite his pricey campaign, Democratic candidate Al Checky now finds himself an underdog.
We have to prepare our workers.
The 49-year-old airline executive pumped more than $30 million into an effort that challenged voters to elect a successful businessman over career politicians.
You know, a lot of people are looking and say, my God, this guy's never been in government before. I'm going to tell you, I can't do any worse than they're doing.
On education, Checky promised a $6 billion infusion of new money he claims would come from cutting state bureaucracy. He wants to give teachers raises, but also make them more accountable with competency testing.
But there are some that just shouldn't be there, and we're going to have to weed them out.
Checky has battled a fair amount of controversy. Accusations he failed to vote in several important elections. Statements he made refusing to send his daughter to public schools.
And I simply don't intend to politicize my children and their future.
Checky supports abortion rights, the death penalty, and tax credits, but opposes Proposition 227, which would end bilingual education in California schools.
I think we just have to go out and talk about the issues.
In the last days before the election, Checky turned to stumping the old-fashioned way, touring in a school bus and reaching out to the voters one by one.
And I think what I'm doing is giving the people of California another choice that they would not otherwise have had.
And again, this is a live picture here at the ballroom at the Biltmore where Al Checky is expected shortly. And again, Dave and Lois, there's been no mention of any results here yet, much less the fact, as you have reported, that the AP is reporting that Gray Davis is already the nominee. We're expecting Checky here shortly. One big question, if he loses tonight, which it appears he has, will he enter a political race again? We hope he can answer that tonight. Back to you.
Well, I don't know if he can take any comfort in this. With 5% of the precincts reporting, he does poll Jane Harmon by 1%. He's got 21 and Harmon's got 20 at this point, so maybe he'll take some comfort.
And I'm curious, Laura, what are they watching if not campaign and election returns?
They are not watching results at all. At the moment, they are showing a video that is sort of a compendium of Checky's campaign. They just turned this on. Earlier, there's been a band playing. There's never been any results up on the screen, and that's sort of curious, but perhaps not unexpected considering Checky's position at this point.
Laura Anthony at Checky headquarters in Los Angeles. Thank you, Laura.
And of course, the Checky race has been one of the big stories of this campaign. Mervyn Field called it an extraordinary case of an inverse relationship between advertising and results. Steve Swat has more on that for us. Steve?
Well, Gray Davis, of course, is trying to become the first California lieutenant governor in 45 years to be elected governor of California. That happened when Goodwin Knight actually succeeded to be governor in 1953 after Earl Warren was named to the U.S. Supreme Court. C.C. Young actually was elected as lieutenant governor to become governor. That was back in 1926. If you look at a map of the states where Gray Davis has carried, he is carrying all of those states in California. It does look like, in fact, a landslide, and with 2 to 3% of the votes being counted, he's carrying nearly 24 of the 58 counties in California, decisively so far in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. Many of the other counties still have not reported many votes yet. Now, a funny thing happened to Al Checky on his way to Sacramento. Being one of the richest men in the world certainly wasn't enough. Here you can see he is not carrying a single county. In fact, statewide, of all the votes counted so far, he is only getting about 12% of all of the votes in the entire primary. And here you have someone worth $850 million who could spend whatever he wanted in a state where megabuck campaign spending is critical, and he couldn't pull it off. Again, not a single county is going to Al Checky this evening, and that makes 2 elections in a row where money could not buy the love of voters. In 1994, Michael Huffington spent $29 million of his own money against Dianne Feinstein and couldn't make it work. The reason, one reason, is that Al Checky appeared to wear out his welcome with an advertising blitz that turned off voters. The negative tone, especially according to exit polls this evening, people saying they were turned off by Al Checky's negative advertising campaign. For all the talk about citizen politicians and outsiders running for office, Californians are saying they prefer a candidate with political experience rather than business experience, and that profile fits Gray Davis to a T. Now, based on trends and if the projections are accurate, get this, Al Checky is spending $43.50 for each vote tonight. Gray Davis, $4.34. Back to you.
I guess Gray got his money's worth.
No kidding.
All right, thanks.
Apparently so. And one of the most bitter and hotly contested race is the seat of former Congressman Vic Fazio, being contested by Barbara Albee and Doug Osee tonight. And Edie Lambert is at Albee campaign headquarters. What's the latest there, Edie?
Well, right now, as you can see, headquarters are packed with Barbara Albee supporters. You can't exactly tell from that, but this is the nervous part of the night. All the ballots, of course, are cast, and they're still waiting for results. Joining me now is Barbara Albee with about 3,000, or at least some of the absentee ballots in. You're down about 3,000, but you were expecting that.
I was expecting it early. My opponent came out very early with a tough negative campaign, and we thought the early returns would be kind of like this, and I'm trusting that the voters that went to the polls will have seen through all of it. But I'm glad it's over, I'll tell you. This has been one few months that I don't want to have to go through again, although I'm willing to go through for November. If we get through this, then it's on to November. But I am so glad tonight's here.
Well, let's talk about how nasty this race got. Do you feel like you will walk out of this fairly wounded?
Well, I expect to have some, a few broken legs and a black eye and whatnot, but I plan to go build those bridges. We decided early that we were going to keep it clean and run on my record, and we did that, and I hope we did the right thing.
This is certainly a race that those back in Washington are watching very closely. They feel the balance of power in Congress could hinge partly on this race.
No, absolutely. This is sort of the seat that they want to take, and it keeps the majority.
Do you expect this to be a tight one tonight as the results come in?
We always expected it to be tight. When you have someone who spends $1 million, we spent $250,000, $250,000. That's going to tighten things up a bit.
Okay. Well, we will be watching this race, of course, right along with you and right along with your supporters. And coming up in about the next hour, we will check in with Doug Osie's campaign. I'm Edie Lambert reporting live. Back to you.
Thanks, Edie.
The propositions are being watched by Sarah Gardner tonight. What's the latest, Sarah?
Lois, with about 5% of the precincts in, all but one of the propositions are passing at this hour. Proposition 224, the state contractors proposition, is the only proposition failing. As expected, Proposition 227, dismantling the state's bilingual education system, is overwhelmingly passing, and Proposition 223, putting a 5% cap on education administrative costs, is passing. Proposition 223, or so-called 95-5 proposition, has two major provisions. First of all, it limits the amount of money each school district can spend on administrative costs. It also establishes new performance budgeting requirements.
The 994 public school districts in California receive funds from federal, state, and local sources. Proposition 223 would require each school district, beginning in the 1999-2000 school year, to limit administration costs to 5% of funds received. The other 95% would go directly to the schools. If a school district fails to meet the 5% cap, it would be penalized approximately $175 per student. Right now, about 95% of school districts have administration costs over 5%. School districts spend on an average of 7.3% on administration, which is about $700 million more each year than permitted under the proposition. Opponents say Prop 223 favors big school districts like LA Unified, which can be run with a smaller percentage of a huge budget. Small districts such as Rescue in El Dorado County, they say, uses a larger percentage due to small budgets.
I don't know that we can cut out a lot because we have already been bare bones, and we've been that way for a long time.
Supporters say 223 would force education dollars into the classroom.
Central offices are not the place where they learn. So we have to make certain that the money goes to the school site.
Proposition 223 will also require each school district to enact performance budgeting beginning in the next school year. It would link its annual budget to improve student performance. However, the measure doesn't detail how this would work in the schools. In terms of fiscal impact, we're looking at about, they estimate, $10 million a year for performance budgeting and $20 million every 5 years for auditing. And by the way, we do have this just in. AP is showing 227 has passed. Dave and Lois, back to you.
All right, thanks, Sarah. And Roy Stearns of our staff is in Los Angeles tonight. He is, among other things, covering the race between Isa and Matt Fong. What are you hearing there, Roy?
Well, what we're hearing here is the same thing you're hearing, that there may be about a 4 percentage point split between the two right now at about 23 to 19, 23 for Matt Fong and 19 for Isa. A little earlier tonight, the Fong people told us that in their own polls, they saw this coming down in just a couple of days ago is about a 5% split, with Fong leading by 5%. We'll see if that happens. About a week ago, this all changed very dramatically with all the revelations that came out of Matt Fong about car magnate Darrell Issa. So in the meantime, let me tell you a little bit about the mood here tonight. It is starting to gear up. The preliminary speeches are going on up at the podium, and we think that Dan Lundgren will be coming down shortly. They said he'd be coming down about 9:15 to 9:30. After him, Pete Wilson, and then sometime after that, Matt Fong. But in the meantime, let's go back to that Fong-Issa race. This is the race that is the real cliffhanger tonight that could come right down to the wire. And here's some background on what this race is all about. At the top of the list, the biggest Republican battle is between Matt Fong and Darrell Issa. The two Republicans want to be the candidate to oppose Barbara Boxer in November for her U.S. Senate seat. And in the last week, there have been charges and countercharges.
People don't know them. They don't have a track record here in California.
I'm not going to get involved in the internal politics of California.
A month ago, Darrell Issa was more than 10 points ahead of Matt Fong. However, in the final week, the accusations against Issa have put the race dead even.
The allegations are serious, and they demand a full and complete explanation by him.
Darrell Issa is not going to dignify Matt Fong's promise-breaking negative campaigning by showing up.
Meanwhile, no question about the Republican nomination for governor. There are 5 Republican candidates, but Attorney General Dan Lundgren is way out in front.
And I hope I can count on your support. All right.
However, while Lundgren may be home free in June, his opposition to abortion rights may have an impact on his ability to win in November. In another race, Republicans Richard Mountjoy and Tim Leslie, both of them state senators, want the lieutenant governor's job. Other Republicans, Attorney General candidates Dave Sterling and Mike Capizzi. Capizzi is the Orange County DA opposing Sterling, the Deputy Attorney General. In the state treasurer's race, Republican Jan Goldsmith and Kurt Pringle are the two Republicans. Insurance Commissioner Chuck Quackenbush is the unopposed Republican. Back now in Los Angeles, what I've just heard in my earpiece is that it's getting even closer on the Fong-Issa race. We have heard that the latest figures in now are 23% for Fong and 21% for Issa. That's about as close as you can get, and early in the evening that makes it impossible to know which way this is going to go. But all of this turned around just about a week ago, as you heard me say. Fong accusing Issa of thuggery, quoting him, thuggery in business, and the Issa camp saying the charges border on slander. Well, obviously what happened in the polls showed that voters took it to heart very much, because 2 weeks ago it was Issa by 10 to 12 points, and tonight it is dead even, and we'll see how it turns out. But that the revelations that were brought out by Matt Fong certainly changed this election in the last few days. In the meantime, the crowd is gearing up. The band is going. The room is full of the party faithful here at Republican headquarters in Newport Beach. And we expect Dan Lundgren to come down shortly, followed by Pete Wilson, and then sometime later tonight, Matt Fong taking the podium to tell us how this all went tonight. Back to you in Sacramento.
All right, Roy Stearns in Los Angeles, and we just want to update that vote total for you once again on the Fong-Issa race as you see it. We have 6% of the vote now being counted, 44% Fong, 39% Issa, and as Roy just mentioned, that's about a 5% split, and that is a recent turnaround, Fong leading at this point.
In the Sacramento area, Larry Bowler is leaving his District 10 Assembly seat. It's a crowded field. Tom Duhane is watching that race for us tonight. Tom?
Right now I'm in the headquarters of one of the Republicans who's hoping to emerge from a very crowded field of 9, hoping to replace Larry Bowler and run in the general election against the Democratic opponent. We're in the headquarters of Anthony Pichetti, who is a SMUD director, and he's running now for the Assembly. Anthony, how do you feel being the leader? It's rather early. You're leading your next closest Republican opponent 2-1.
Feels good. Hopefully it'll hold up.
What do you do to distinguish yourself when there's such a big field? 9 Republicans, many of them are well known in the community, like the person trailing you now on the 2-1 is Dr. Alan Nakanishi from Lodi. How do you manage to distinguish yourself in this race?
I think a couple of things. One is direct mail. We had an extensive direct mail campaign towards the last 2 weeks. Radio, signs, and a lot of great help like you see behind us.
Okay. And at this point, even though it's early, are you confident that you'll be the nominee?
Yes, I am. Very confident. I feel real good.
Thank you. So that's the latest on the 10th Assembly District, where SMUD Director Anthony Pichetti seems to be in the lead. As we mentioned, there are 9 separate Republican candidates vying to replace Larry Bowler. There are 2 Democrats running, and Deborah Gravert is the legislative aide who is now leading on the Democratic side, and there'll also be a Libertarian in the race as well. And that's the way things are shaping up here regarding the 10th Assembly District. Back to you.
All right, thank you. And we're going to check in with Kelly Brothers with our Voices of California once again. Kelly?
Well, Dave, we left on a high note last time having to do with voter apathy, and we just had a lot of people who really seemed to chime in with our caller who said he doesn't vote anymore because he's tired of voting on propositions and then seeing them thrown into the courts for years at a time. Richard, that seemed to strike a chord with you, didn't it?
It struck a chord with me, but I think as a Latino, what I'm hopeful for, and as having done voter registration in the Latino community, is that we're going to see Hispanic voters involved. We have Hispanic candidates running for every major office in California. It's very likely that Latino will be lieutenant governor. He will probably win his race. We have an assemblyman, assembly speaker who is Latino. So we're involved in the Latino community and registering voters.
Well, you are, but as we pointed out earlier, there's still very low voter turnout among Latinos as well.
Historically, that's been very true. But I think as we progress, especially this election, and because of the issues that we've had in the past, we're going to get more people involved in the process, and that's what's important.
Okay, thank you very much. Debbie, what's your view on all this?
Well, I think there's some historical precedents for a low voter turnout, perhaps when the times are good. Economically, we're not as threatened as we are. You know, I mean, if we were in an economic crisis, if we were in a time of war, you'd have those people out there in the streets. So I'm not sure realistically that we're really going to get them out there. And on the other hand, I was sharing with Rich here, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, if you want to try it out as an experiment, you've got 227, you're forcing people to learn English in a year, maybe you ought to maybe pass a law and force people to go and vote. Or you have a state surplus, give them $1 when they show up at the polls and see how many you get. I mean, is it gonna, does it hurt at this point? You know, so I'm not too sure whether we're realistically going to make much of a change during this type of economic.
I think there's another issue involved here. That is, we're moving into a multicultural society, majority, and many of these cultures had no democratic history in the past, and so we have to inculcate the democratic tradition into all our people so that we can become a representative democracy.
Inculcate. I knew a new word every time from you. Who else? Hold on. Ron is down here. Ron, what do you have to say?
Well, Kelly, I kind of think that perhaps we may be a little naive in concluding that the majority of California citizens are apathetic. I'd like to propose that perhaps they're actually rendering a very intelligent message, one of perhaps even civil disobedience. It states that there's a high level of dissatisfaction. I took the liberty of looking up politics and politician during break, and it's defined as one who seeks personal or partisan gain, often by crafty or dishonest means. Was it possible that the California voter, is it possible that the California voter is saying, we want people that we can trust, we want ideas that will heighten our standards of living, we want people who see our best value and best potential. And perhaps they're saying by their civil disobedience that we don't see it and we don't hear it. Therefore, is it to our advantage to label them as apathetic and not really hear their message of civil disobedience?
Okay, Ron, thank you. Yeah.
Well, on the contrary, I think a lot of people don't really understand the importance and the powerful message that a vote undertakes. I mean, most people that have had an opportunity to travel abroad, serve their country, they understand what it is to be an American and the right, and not only the responsibility to vote. I mean, it wasn't until 1964 that the civil rights allowed for African Americans to vote. Women didn't vote until the mid-20s and 1920s. We take a look at in Vietnam, where young kids were able to die for their country, but they couldn't vote. We take a look at South Africa, who fought a civil war to get the right to vote. And I think it's something that as Americans, we're forgetting that opportunity that's given to us in that right to vote.
And as Debbie pointed out, many people of this generation haven't been through a war, haven't seen really hard times, and know the value of a great leader to get you through a time like that. So thank you very much for your comments. We're going to continue on this tack, but move into negative campaigning. We've also had some discussions on negative campaigns and some of the spots that ran in this election cycle. We want to again open up the phone lines, 1-800-513-3333. We'll be taking your calls on negative campaigning and whether or not that has at all contributed to the voter apathy or voter disobedience, as you might say there, Ron. David Lois, back to you.
All right, Kelly, it's the sheriff's race sequel playing once again in the Central Valley tonight in San Joaquin County. Sheriff Baxter Dunn is being challenged again by the man who made it a close race in their last election. Channel 3's Rich Ibarra live in Stockton. Rich?
Well, here at San Joaquin County Elections Office, I'm here with Mike Machado, Democratic Assemblyman from the 17th Assembly District. He is running unopposed this time. You find that kind of strange? I mean, there are a number of races where we find for instance, in the Democratic primary, your primary, that there is no one challenging you in a district that has traditionally seen a number of other candidates running for your office.
Well, I would hope that people have looked at the job that I've done. It's a reflection of my ability to be able to represent the district adequately. But it's true, throughout the state, there are many districts where you only have just the incumbent running, and I think a lot of it has to do with just term limits, where people are looking at a person having 2 years left or 4 years left and wondering if the effort is worth to be mounted if within the short period of time there's going to be a turnover anyway. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing as a result of term limits.
Not in your election, but of course in a number of other elections we've seen a lot of big money candidates. What about the candidates this year in the statewide elections?
Well, I think the statewide elections were interesting in a number of fronts. You had some big money candidates in the governor's race and the Senate race, and what is surprising tonight, I think, is the performance that they're doing. The voters obviously are taking a look at the candidates and then tonight rewarding those that have experience or have some sort of public service behind them as they run for these offices.
Certainly when the candidates or the campaign started, we saw a lead by those big money candidates.
Yes, we did, and then we saw the advertising that came in that turned a little to the negative on just about all accounts, and I think that's a sad state for California politics because we should be looking at the issues, and we know we have plenty of issues in California that need to be addressed as we look forward to trying to move California into the next millennium, and hopefully the November campaign will be a campaign of issues.
What about the statewide races? Any surprises that you've seen so far?
I think the statewide races are reflecting what the recent poll numbers have projected. I really don't see that much. I think 226, the closeness that we're seeing there is something that has moved up, and it's probably surprising some of the people the closeness that it has right now.
Now, certainly in November, you will face a Republican challenger, but interesting in that race, too, there is only one Republican challenger that's opposing you.
Yes. Will be running again and probably looking at appealing to the same voters that we're appealing to tonight.
Thank you, Mike. Reporting from San Joaquin's Elections Office, I'm Rich Iver. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Rich. And until about a week ago, Proposition 227 had overwhelming support. That's the bilingual education initiative. Our numbers say that with 6% of the precincts in, we've got about a 70-30 win. And Gina Garcia, who's following this race, Gina, AP, as we reported earlier, has projected this as passing 227.
That's right, Lois, but that is just according to exit polling numbers that they are using. We don't have an official outcome of Prop 227 at this point. Let's go ahead and take a look at those numbers once again. So far, with 6% of the votes coming in, we have 70% with a yes vote and 30% with a no vote. The bottom line here is that if Prop 227 does pass, kids in California schools would be taught in English only. Okay, so once again, so far we have 70% voting yes for Proposition 227. Dave and Lois, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, Gina. And Sarah Gardner is keeping track of the rest of the proposition issues on the ballot for us. What's the latest, Sarah?
Well, Dave and Lois, as you just heard, according to an Associated Press exit poll, Proposition 227 has passed. Now, Proposition 227 is known as the English for the Children, is the brainchild of businessman Ron Unz. One proposition that is failing right now is Proposition 224, the competitive bidding initiative. It would require competitive bidding for state engineering or design contracts of more than $50,000 and passing by a very narrow margin. Proposition 226, the union dues initiative, would require labor organizations to get permission from its members before using union dues for political contributions. Dave and Lois, back to you.
All right, Sarah, thank you. And as Steve Swat noticed earlier in this election night returns, I guess, Steve, one of the things that really helped Gray Davis was Proposition 226 in some way.
Clearly, I think the outpouring of union organizing and the union effort in California to fight Proposition 226 did, in fact, help Gray Davis. But if you look at the way the vote is going this evening, Gray Davis probably didn't even need that help. This is a victory for him. It looks like of monumental proportions. He is carrying, you know, just about every county in the state of California that is reporting significant votes. And as a matter of fact, as of this hour, he is winning 61% of the Democratic vote vote in San Francisco, 56% of the Democratic vote in Los Angeles, 47% in San Diego, 57% in Santa Clara County, and 64% in Sacramento County. Those are the vote-rich counties of California. Here is Gray Davis, who was underfunded, up against some fresh faces with plenty of money, a career politician, and he really is winning what appears to be a landslide victory this evening.
And draw for November from this race?
I think it's going to be a very difficult contest for Dan Lundgren. A lot of people thought this would be really almost a walk for Lundgren to some degree, but what happens as you get closer to Election Day, the partisanship tends to re-exert itself. The Democrats start coming home, the Republicans start coming home, and the way you have California, basically you have roughly 6 million voters in the state of California, and all but a handful are really independents, and it's those handful that the candidates will be going after in the fall. And it would appear that the candidates that might appeal to the more moderate of the voters would be the ones that would be successful in the fall.
Steve, in this open primary, for the first time, voters could make some mischief here. And you heard Dan Lundgren speak earlier in this evening that he heard some reports that Republicans were going to vote for Gray Davis because they thought he would be an easier candidate for Dan Lundgren to defeat.
Not only that, as a matter of fact, there are a lot of Republicans who are secretly a bit happy that Gray Davis is the nominee this evening, because Gray Davis, you got to remember, doesn't have $850 million, and so he will suck up a lot of the Democratic money in November, money that could go for other Democratic candidates down lower on the food chain for state assembly and state senate. And so this really puts Lundgren and Davis on equal footing. If Al Checky, for example, had gotten the nomination, then he could self-fund the entire campaign. Democrats would then contribute to candidates lower down the food chain, and that would help Democrats boost their efforts in the state legislature.
Steve Swat, thanks.
Yeah, money a big story in this campaign, and Tim Herrera has a story for us tonight about that, I guess, looking for money all the time, right, Tim?
That's right. The late contribution is what we're talking about here, Lois. Now, Gray Davis has said all along that he is not the big money candidate, especially compared to someone like Al Checky. But records show that in the past few weeks, donations have been pouring in for Gray Davis. He certainly has not been cash poor lately. The big money has been rolling in like in the last days of the campaign. In the last 2 weeks, Gray Davis collected more than $800,000 in donations to help his cause. That's a lot of people dumping money into the guy in the lead. Take a look at the late contributions recorded by the Secretary of State. Last week, a Southern California-based firm, Triangle Land Company, handed the Lieutenant Governor $50,000. The California Firefighters Political Action Committee gave Davis $25,000. So did Benny Algemeng. He is the president of Packard Bell, the computer giant. Now, on the other hand, let's talk about millionaire Al Checky. He has said all along that he would not accept any donations to fund his campaign, that he would pay the bill himself. He's projected to spend more than $30 million, but the last 2 weeks, we found that he has collected some donations, or at least some donations were made to his campaign. One group called Black Men and Women, or BMW, declared a donation of more than $2,500 to the millionaire campaign. And the National Abortion Rights Action League Political Action Committee also claimed a Checky donation of nearly $2,900. A Checky spokesperson we talked to told us that Checky does not accept cash donations. These may be in-kind donations, such as mailings or the hosting of an event, that were claimed by these groups, not necessarily by Al Checky. We asked if those in-kind donations would be reimbursed back to those groups by Checky, who has promised not to spend any money of his money from anyone else, and the spokesman told us that they would let us know if Checky would make those payments back. Dave and Lois?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is that in any other race, whatever Gray Davis spent, and I think it was somewhere between $9 and $12 million, that would be considered huge. It's only in California that that kind of money, you know, next to the Checkys and Harmons of the world, that isn't considered a lot.
That's right. In the last few days of the campaign, that's when the money really starts to pour in. The biggest campaign contribution that Jane Harmon got was $25,000. That was from PG&E. Just a final note, too, it appears that maybe Gray Davis has a musical connection as well. The president of Motown Records gave him $1,000, and Bill Graham Presents gave Gray Davis $5,000.
All right. Thank you.
I guess it thank you, Tim, and to put this all in perspective, how California seems to spend more money than anybody on this planet on elections. The governor of New York, Pataki, his campaign funding is $12 million.
Yeah,
total.
anywhere
and
else.
that is considered a record in the state of New York.
Kelly Brothers once again with our Voices of California. Kelly, what are you up to?
This time we're talking about negative campaigning, Lois, and of course not only whether or not these folks like negative campaigning, but its effects on the campaign itself, because as we saw some of the poll numbers, as soon as the negative campaign ads started to fly in the Democratic gubernatorial side, well, as we saw, those numbers changed radically. Here's a sample of some of the negative campaigns from this campaign.
As state controller, Gray Davis took over $500,000 in campaign contributions from Wall Street and bond lawyers. In exchange, Davis gave them over $7 billion in state investments.
What kind of man would try to smear his opponents? Al Checky, a man who fired 4,000 people, forced thousands to take pay cuts while paying himself $10 million a year.
Barbara Albee is making excuses for having the worst attendance in the assembly. She says she was having dental work, but the record lists only 4 days off for illness. She says there was a family emergency.
Well, negative campaign ads are nothing new, obviously, but there's a debate over whether they hurt the intended target more or the person who actually ran the ad. Cindy, let's begin with you. What do you feel about this?
Well, I guess you can see from the polls that negative campaigning hasn't worked for any of the candidates that has done it. And I think we need to look at the question why people have chosen negative campaigning. And I think that dates back to the issue that we had before.
Cindy, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're going to get back to this in just a moment, but we understand Dan Lundgren is about to approach the podium, so we'll go back to Dave and Lois.
Dan Lundgren down south in California. And of course, he ran away with his nomination, as everybody expected he would.
95% of the vote.
Yeah, we don't have all the votes in, obviously, just 5 or 6%, I guess, at the last tally. But nonetheless, he didn't have any significant opposition. So it looks like he's about to declare victory.
It will be Dan Lundgren opposing Gray Davis. The latest returns, 8% of the vote being counted now, and 95% of the vote going to Dan Lundgren. He is accepting the congratulations, the applause, the smiles of his friends at his campaign headquarters in Los Angeles tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you. I must tell you, this was a tough race tonight. I just finished talking to my opponent, Dennis Perone, in San Francisco, and I think he was trying to concede, but he said something to the words about party on, dude, so I'm not sure exactly what that means. It is great to be here with all of you, those of you who understand how important this race for governor of the state of California in this year, 1998, is and will be. We could not possibly do it without you. We thank you from the bottom of our heart for the work that you have done, for the support that you've given us. But we tell you that while we know we can win this race in November, we will not win this race unless you work as hard as you possibly can from now until that election day in November. And I am trusting you to do that for us and with us. We have been on this journey for many months. It's been interesting. I've had people ask me on airplanes and at hotels and other places before we went on TV, they said, "Are you going to run for governor? When are you going to start your campaign?" There was some thought there that unless you were on TV, you weren't real. There are some that said California was set up for a virtual campaign rather than a real campaign. From what I see from the trend lines coming in on the other side of the aisle, it looks like virtual campaigning is not the campaigning of the future in California. People want to see their candidates. They want to hear from their candidates. They want their candidates to listen to them. We have been doing that not just for the last 16 months, but for the last 22 years. We will keep doing it for the next months of this campaign. And then after we are successful in November, we'll keep doing it during 8 years of a Lundgren administration. I do have a question for you out there, though. Are you tired of dirty campaigning? Yes. Are you tired of mudslinging? Yes. Are you tired of campaigns that are totally focused on 30-second or 15-second commercials? Yes. Do you want to hear from the candidates between now and November? Yes. Do you want to have debates from now and November? Do you want to have debates this month with my opponent? Let's make sure that happens. Let's make sure that we have a campaign that's based on issues, that talks about what the people of California want to do, that talks about those things that are important to them. I'm not sure at this point in time who my Democratic opponent is going to be. However, AP has said it may be Gray Davis. That's all right. No. Whoever the nominee the Democrats present to us, I think will show a contrast to what I hope to bring to California. Gray Davis, for instance, has identified himself as a liberal Democrat. I identify myself as a conservative Republican. We will have an honest, straightforward debate on the issues. We will show two visions of California, two ways about which the people of California can go about their business of governing, two ways that the people of California view the future in terms of education. I am one who believes in giving as much freedom, as much choice to the parents of children in California so they can have the best education possible, and my opponents disagree with me. Let's go to the voters on that. There are some out there who believe that crime is no longer an issue, that the question of the personal safety of the men, the women, the children of California is not at the top of the agenda. I want to tell them that I have dedicated my public life to work with many people in the state of California, with victims of crime and their family members and representatives, with the wonderful men of law enforcement, men and women of law enforcement throughout this state of California, and all who have joined together as common citizens to work to change the atmosphere dealing with criminals in this state. We began with George Deukmejian. We continued with Pete Wilson. I have worked side by side with both of them and many others in trying to bring a change in this state in terms of public safety. We have succeeded beyond our wildest dreams in the last 4 years, driving crime down to the lowest levels that we've ever seen in 30 years. But that is not good enough. I want you to join me in a crusade to ensure that the crime rate will go down to the levels not seen since 1955, and so that every child in California will fear perhaps, worrying about his homework and his or her test rather than their safety on the way to school, while they're at school, or on their way home. Now, there are those who believe, there are those on the other side of the aisle, there are those, even political pundits out there, who believe that the issue of taxes and regulation and government directing of our lives are not hot issues today. They've got some real news coming to them. I believe that my promise to the people of California to involve ourselves together collectively in a review of the overall tax code of California with the idea of bringing the overall tax bite down should start with a down payment of eliminating the car tax for the people of the state of California. The car tax is an average cost of $340 or $70 per family of 4 in California. We have a huge surplus in California state government right now. Yesterday on television, Al Checky and I and Jane Harmon involved ourselves in a little debate. Gray Davis couldn't be found. And Al Checky defined the surplus as government just happening to take in a little bit more money than they had projected. And therefore, he said there was no reason to give it back to the people. I said, Al, that is a major distinction between those of you running on the Democratic side and me. I define a surplus as the government taking more money from the hardworking taxpayers of California than they should have, and that means some portion of that, a significant portion of that, should be returned to the rightful owners, the people of the state of California. Did you ever notice how some on the other side of the aisle, some of the Democrats, some of our liberal friends say that when there's time for a tax cut, they never ask whether, when there's time for a tax increase, they never ask you whether you can afford it. But when it's time for a tax cut, they always say, can we afford to give it to you? There's a major difference there. We need to try and bring some common sense into our tax system. We need a 21st century tax code for the 21st century economy of the state of California, and I'm going to work with you to bring that to the people of the state of California. Lastly, I want to work with you. I want to work with each and every one of you. I want to work with you to be able to instill the same feeling for everybody in the state of California that I had as a child about the greatness of this state, about the powerful opportunity in this state, about the need for everybody to work together so that every child of God can share in that positive dream. We know as we stand here today that most of us have been blessed with the grace of God to live in California. We've had the chance to either be born here, to be raised here, or to raise our children or our grandchildren here. And we thank God every night for that. We understand that California grants the greatest vistas to the people of this state that any state or any country could possibly do. But we also understand this. There are some that have been left behind. There are some that do not now eat at the same table that we eat from, do not partake of the same feast that we partake, do not have that same sense of security, do not have that same idea that their children are going to the best schools or their children will have every opportunity. To those people I say, we Republicans understand. We Republicans believe the same as you do. We have the same hopes and dreams and aspirations for our children and our grandchildren as you have for yours. We want to work with you to make sure that all of us walk together, that nobody is left behind. And I want to say this to my opponent, whether it's Gray Davis, whether it's Al Checky or Jane Harmon. If you think for a moment we concede one block,
all right, you're hearing from Dan Lundgren, but we understand that Jane Harmon is about to come out and speak to her supporters. And there's Jane Harmon's headquarters. She's in Manhattan Beach tonight.
Pretty great. Pretty great. Pretty great. Pretty great. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you all know where you are. You're in the middle of the 36th Congressional District, the best congressional district on earth, right? Right. Well, thank you. I, a few minutes ago, called Gray and Sharon Davis to extend my congratulations and my support. They are friends and have been for a long time, and Gray ran an excellent campaign, and I will join him tomorrow morning at the Unity Breakfast to help beat Dan Lundgren. Winning is more fun, but losing with honor ain't bad. We ran a positive campaign, the only kind I have ever run. We addressed the critical issues, including school violence, the need to put patients first in health care, a woman's right to choose, which must never be taken away, the importance of environmental protection, including a permanent ban on offshore oil drilling, and the need within budget constraints to make critical investments in education and transportation and affordable housing to put this state where it must be to sustain our 21st century economic recovery. I'm proud of what I've done in this congressional district to diversify the industrial base and to generate employment that will last. But many parts of California don't have that. And when I go back to Congress tomorrow, I will continue to fight there as I would have here to help every single Californian share in our new prosperity. A wonderful part of this campaign was the chance to reconnect to all of California. As one who grew up here and loves it here, it was extraordinary to be everywhere and to see so many old friends like those standing behind me on the stage, and to feel the love and support of an extraordinary family. My poetic husband, Sidney, children, Brian and Hillary, Lynn, Katinka Tunney, my brother David, and sister-in-law.
Jane Harman conceding gracefully from her campaign headquarters tonight in Manhattan Beach. And we're going to check in now with our political correspondent, Kevin Riggs, who is at the Gray Davis headquarters in Los Angeles. A big night for Gray Davis, Kevin.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the excitement has really reached a fever pitch here tonight. A large crowd here gathered at the Biltmore to celebrate what is apparently a very strong victory for Gray Davis tonight. We have some video we'd like to show you that was shot just a couple of minutes ago. Here you can see Gray Davis and his wife Sharon sitting in his hotel room here at the Biltmore Hotel watching the early returns. Now, while he was sitting there watching those returns, and they were very strong returns, the phone rang, and it was a phone call from Jane Harman, the third major Democrat in this race. It was Jane Harman calling to congratulate him and to concede that she had lost this contest. Still no word tonight, though, from Al Checky. At the podium right now is San Francisco Mayor and former Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, and Willie Brown is doing basically the warm-up act for Gray Davis. Gray Davis should be coming out here to address this crowd in just a few minutes. Let's listen for just a moment as Willie Brown addresses the crowd here at the Los Angeles Biltmore.
We're going to have to work like we've never worked before. We're going to have to put together an operation that reaches into every assembly district, into every Senate district, into every congressional district, into every other election that's on the same ballot, for the purpose of making sure good people are registered and show up to vote. And if we do that, we'll have a celebration in Sacramento come January of the year of 1999 like we've never had before. And truly, happy days will be here again. So I'll see you in a few minutes. I just received a note, and it is a happy note. Our candidate, Gray Davis, is currently on the telephone. He is talking to Air Force One. This is like the Final Four. of the World Series.
Back here live at the Los Angeles Biltmore, where, as you can see, San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown has been warming up this crowd as they await the arrival of Gray Davis. Gray Davis has been inside the Biltmore here at his room upstairs. We just saw the tape of that. He's been here since about 5:30 this evening, waiting for the polls to close and then watching the returns. And again, he is due out here shortly. Willie Brown telling this crowd tonight that it has been 16 long years since a Democrat was in the governor's office. And he says, a true Democrat, to quote Willie Brown, a true Democrat has emerged from this primary election tonight, and they are looking forward to a very vigorous fall campaign. I talked to Gary South, who is Gray Davis's campaign director, and he said they expected this all along. They were very confident. In any event, we are awaiting the arrival of Gray Davis, and it should be happening momentarily. Dave, Lois, back to you.
Would be a sweet victory, I suppose. Willie Brown, of course, a longtime opponent of the Republican governor. He's taking special pride in planning his party already. He loves a party, Willie Brown.
He does indeed. And as you heard, Dan Lundgren has already challenged Gray Davis to some campaign debates. We'll see what happens.